I like also thinking about doing no harm. If you want to expand your consciousness, would you do it at the cost of harming others? What if those others are a frog or a plant? Is it worth it? So I think those are very important questions to ask.
You're listening to Narcotica, a podcast giving you the straight dope about drugs and the people who use them.
Psychedelic drugs are well beyond the, quote, renaissance stage and relatively recently entered a gold rush as dozens of companies maneuver themselves to make this nascent industry as profitable as possible for themselves. At least that's part of their motivation. It's a bit of a double-edged sword for folks that want to see an end to the drug war, but also don't want access to these substances available only through doctors and therapists. While Big Pharma slowly ambles onward to transform psychedelics into the next blockbuster pharmaceutical, the plant medicine decriminalization movement is steadily growing in the United States. It all started with Denver, Colorado in mid-2019, when the city council passed an ordinance making psilocybin magic mushrooms the lowest police priority. That doesn't legalize shrooms, especially not sales or distribution, but it does make it so that possession and personal use of psilocybin mushrooms is very unlikely to invite any legal consequences. Inspired by this change, which won the vote by literally half a percentage point, many other cities soon followed suit, including Oakland, Ann Arbor, Michigan, Cambridge, Massachusetts, and many others. But many of these places went a step further, decriminalizing not just psilocybin mushrooms, but virtually all psychedelic plants, iboga, ayahuasca, mescaline cactus, and others. During the last major election, Washington, D.C. voted to decriminalize all plant and fungi-based psychedelics, one of the biggest wins yet for this burgeoning movement. But whether the laws ever catch up or not, plenty of people are taking plant-based psychedelics for spiritual, medicinal, and yes, even recreational purposes. No judgment here. The thriving popularity of naturally occurring entheogens has sparked a lot of concern from some in the psychedelics community who warn that overuse of these plants for any purpose could drive them to virtual extinction. Imagine if ayahuasca became like silphium, the ancient contraceptive used by the Greeks and Romans that was consumed to such excess that it is now believed to have vanished from the earth. Could the same thing happen to plant-based psychedelics? I'm Troy Farah, and you're listening to Narcotica. We've got a great show planned for you today, but first, I have to remind you that, for now, Narcotica is ad-free. We often forget to even include mention of this, but we do have a Patreon account at patreon.com/narcotica. It's the best way for folks who appreciate this program to support us. Even a little bit goes a long way. I know this message is probably annoying, but it's better than hearing about some posh rehab or CBD product, at least I hope. So that's it. If you like the show, join our Patreon. We might make a Venmo or something, I don't know. Or tell a friend about us. Most podcasts spread through word of mouth, so tell everyone about Narcotica, a podcast about why getting high shouldn't be illegal. On the show today, we have Dr. Anya Ermakova, a researcher based in London with a very extensive background in conservation, ethnobotany, neuroscience, psychiatry, and more, almost all of which relates back to psychedelics in some way. She has a master's in conservation science from Imperial College London, a PhD in psychiatry from the University of Cambridge, and a bachelor's degree in biological sciences from the University of Edinburgh. She's worked as a science officer at the Beckley Foundation and has provided psychedelic welfare and harm reduction services with PsyCare UK and Zendo, and so much more. It's a great honor. Anya, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you very much for the introduction. Pleasure to be here.
Let's introduce listeners to you a little bit more. How did you get involved in psychedelics? I know your background, I think it began more in psychiatry, correct?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I studied biology, but then I decided to specialize in neuroscience, and I went straight into PhD in neuropsychiatry, where I was studying the origins of psychosis. I was trying to figure out why delusions form and persist. And through reading a lot about mental health and problems brought me to think about consciousness and altered states of consciousness, and several lectures that I heard during my PhD. One of them was by Professor David Nutt about psychedelics, Another was Dr. Ben Sessa, who is a British psychiatrist and a really amazing public speaker. So I listened to their lectures, and at the end of my PhD, I got me thinking, like, what do I want to do? How do I want to get into this field? And I was lucky enough to get a job at the Beckley Foundation, which is a European counterpart of MAPS. It's a non-profit organization that sponsors research into psychedelics. And that's how I got to be professionally involved with psychedelics.
That's awesome. Yeah, I like a lot of your research. It's really interesting. I like how it covers so many different areas. So today I really want to talk about, psychedelic plants and sustainability, the environment and that kind of thing. But first, I'd kind of like to gauge your thoughts on the decriminalization movement in general in the U.S. So to give some background, there's a lot of different cities and states that are passing laws or are considering to pass laws that basically make psychedelic plants the lowest police priority, so that if the police have literally nothing else to do, maybe they'll bother you for having some shrooms on you. But in general, the idea is that they'll look the other way, and that personal use, rather than selling it or having like some sort of industry, is allowed. But what are your thoughts on this moment in U.S. history?
I think it's a wonderful development and much needed and long waited for. And actually, United States is a lot more ahead than, for example, UK. I know Portugal decriminalized all drugs in the early 2000s, but and we all hoped that other countries in Europe will follow, because it was an incredibly successful experiment, and it's really. In terms of public health, it was really, really successful. But unfortunately, other countries haven't followed. And now, almost 20 years later, finally, we can see movements in the United States, and only with psychedelics for now. But who knows, maybe other drugs would follow as well with decriminalization. I really hope so.
One criticism that I have of the decriminalization movement is that it talks a lot about plant-based medicine, but it seems to exclude, opium or coca leaves or even khat, stuff like that. I mean, and I kind of understand why. Like, there's a certain like palatability of public consciousness. Like, they're not going to allow people to just like start growing their own opium or using that, like, because there's a stigma against that. But I also feel like, it's 2021. Maybe we should just stop asking for little incremental changes and just start demanding an end to this whole thing. And I don't know. It's easy for me to be critical of this kind of thing, but I also am a little impatient, to be honest. I want to see people have access to all sorts of plant medicine. It's ridiculous, in my opinion, to make plants illegal.
Yeah, I absolutely on the same page with you, and I would love to see all drugs decriminalized. But I think most people want to step carefully and go in the incremental steps, and they think, okay, maybe if we rate drugs by their harms, for example, and if you use this approach and start with decriminalizing least harmful drugs, which would be psychedelics, and then as public opinion changes, slowly move on to the next steps. I think that's the most of the reasoning behind. But I fully agree with you that, especially in the United States, with this horrendous opioid epidemics and all sorts of health crisis, it is important to decriminalize all drugs and spend those money for helping the people rather than putting them to jail and getting their assets.
Yeah, absolutely. So a growing problem in the psychedelic space seems to be sustainability. There's all this sudden interest in these psychoactive plants and fungi, which has inspired psychedelic tourism, people traveling to places like Peru or Mexico for, quote, genuine experiences with things like iboga or ayahuasca. This is a growing trend that many in psychedelic circles are, raising the alarm bells. They say this could threaten the existence of these plants, that they could be poached to virtual extinction. Let's start with Tim Ferriss. He's an entrepreneur and lifestyle guru. He's donated several $1 million to psychedelic research. In late February, Tim wrote a blog titled An Urgent Plea to Users of Psychedelics. Let's consider a more ethical menu of plants and compounds. And in this list, he includes a whole bunch of naturally occurring psychedelics from 5-MeO-DMT to Cambo, which he says people interested in should avoid unless they have a really good reason for it. And then he gives some of these alternatives, psychedelics that kind of more sustainable, less impact on the environment maybe, but can kind of give some people the same medicinal value. We'll get into the details of some of these plants, the pros and cons of his argument here, but what do you think of it overall? What the statement that he's making?
Well, I believe that Tim Ferriss can reach a lot of people, and a lot of people would read this blog and take it into consideration. And his message overall is very necessary and important and timely. And I think his motives are good, and for many people, his advice would be useful. I have certain disagreements with his approach, or at least with some of the things. And of course, you have to think that he approaches it from the point of view of Tim Ferriss and his own moral and ethical judgments that a lot of people would disagree with, for example, or not think in the same way he is. But it is a very important perspective, and I think very important words to hear. And many of those questions I also encourage people to ask, like, for example, if you're participating in ceremonies, you have to ask the questions: where do plant medicine come from? Where does toad secretions come from? Who harvested it? When was it ethical? And whatnot. So these are very, very important questions. And I like also thinking about doing no harm. If you want to expand your consciousness, would you do it at the cost of harming others? What if those others are a frog or a plant? Is it worth it? So I think those are very important questions to ask.
Yeah. Psychedelics have been, for me personally, a really great tool for having empathy for nature. It's kind of embarrassing to admit, but like before I took psychedelics, like I didn't really care that much about nature. Like now I can feel the empathy in an insect, and insects are some of my favorite things to study and to witness. And before that, it was just it was hard to feel like get into the perspective of an insect and like care that it can suffer. Expanding your consciousness using psychedelic plants, like I do have that consideration now. Like, am I going to do it at the expense of something even like if you think it's just a toad, it's just a plant. I think that those considerations are important, and that for whatever reason, my experience is not unique. A lot of people feel that way. They take psychedelics and then suddenly like, oh, I'm not just this brain in a body, like I'm this whole part of this whole ecosystem. Like we are, it's cliche to say, but we are all connected to this nature, and to think that we're separate is it's completely narrow-minded. It's myopic.
It's very, very true. And there is actually very interesting research coming out from the Imperial College London, and it's led by my friend Dr. Sam Gandhi, who studies nature connectedness and how psychedelics can increase nature connectedness. And what is remarkable, this finding, he truly believes that it invokes something innate in human nature, that we are nature, we are part of it. And he believes that it can, this is not only for example, people who take psychedelics for exploration and stuff. He even sees this pattern of increased nature connectedness in people who take psychedelics within clinical trials in those very medical settings. Even they experience this increase in nature connectedness, amongst other things. So he truly believes that it speaks towards something universal, and an optimist in me also really wants to believe in it. And I see it true for so many people around me.
Yeah. And I think it's important to note it's not everybody's experience. A lot of people can take these drugs and like they don't feel more spiritual, they don't feel more connected to nature, and that's fine. Does the researcher you mentioned, I didn't catch his name, does he have a theory for what the underlying mechanism is for this? Or maybe you have your own theory, like maybe just like kind of like dissolving the default mode network is kind of related to this experience? Like why do we feel more of a connection to nature on psychedelics?
He relates it to the experience of ego dissolution and this experience of becoming one with the universe. And he likes to talk about an overview effect as well, how this contributes to this sense of connection to nature, where the overview effect is, say, what cosmonauts or astronauts experience when they look at the Earth from space, and you feel this fragility and the beauty of this system, this organism, and you feel part of it. And this experience of awe and the beauty of everything. This also relates to the mystical experiences that are so important for the therapeutical action of psychedelics. And he thinks that that also contributes to nature relatedness.
Now, it's really interesting, and I can understand why so many people right now are attracted to this idea. They hear all these anecdotes in the media or see stuff in scientific literature, and they're like, "Well, I want that." And hopefully they get the experience that they're looking for. But that brings us to sustainability, because as more people find these plant medicines, the interest rises, and that increases the harvesting of them. And we live in a capitalist society for the most part, and that really just drives consumption, and not in a way that's where we think long term about, okay, so I harvest this vine today, will it be here in 10 years? Will it be there for the next generation? That kind of thing. I think a good place to start is with the sustainability of ayahuasca ingredients. Ayahuasca is a brew, it can be made a lot of different ways, but it's commonly made out of, and I'm going to probably butcher this name, but Baniesterioptis capi vine. And then the Psychotria viridis shrub. You have to mix two of these plants together. One is a vine, one is a shrub. One contains an MAOI, the other one contains DMT, and they kind of work together in this synergistic way to create the ayahuasca experience. When we last spoke, Anya, you said that you thought it was very unlikely that the vine would go extinct in the wild. Can you tell me a little more about why?
The reason why I'm saying this, that the wine grows actually in quite a lot of all across the Amazon rainforest. Its distribution is fairly wide. And what we see now and documented reported shortages of it are in the centers of ayahuasca trade, for example, in Iquitos. And even there, a lot of people start to cultivate it. There is even a phrase that I heard people describe it as a cash crop. And as you mentioned, there is increased knowledge about ayahuasca, and more foreigners are coming to experience it. And enterprising locals are starting to grow it. But another reason why I think that ayahuasca is not necessary is probably not something that is in urgent need of protection, is that it's a fairly fast-growing vine. And unlike, for example, peyote, it doesn't take 10 years to mature. It can be harvestable within 1 year of planting. And I think when it comes to Amazon and ayahuasca, probably the most disturbing piece of news that I heard about it was, for example, the increase in trade in jaguar parts fueled by ayahuasca tourism. And that was really, really disturbing because there are a lot less jaguars. And if somebody goes to the Amazon and has an ayahuasca trip and has visions of jaguars and then decides to take a memento of a jaguar claws or teeth or whatever other body parts, this is highly, highly irresponsible and very upsetting. But this said, I don't want to say that people shouldn't care about ayahuasca wine. What I'm saying is, of course, if you're going to do ayahuasca, it's very important to ask the question, is it cultivated? Is it harvested sustainably? Where is it taken from? Where is it going? How does it affect local communities? You always have to ask this question. And you have to ask those questions not just when it comes to ayahuasca. The same relates to, where does your meat come from? Do you even eat meat? Where does your soy come from? Where does your palm oil come from? And I think this mindset that, we should worry about ayahuasca and not worry about, say, palm oil is very narrow-minded. I think we need to think of it in a scale. And unfortunately, human activity is destroying nature in pretty much every possible way. So I think it's very important to think about it holistically, in a sense.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Like, you're definitely not saying that, oh, just go take as much ayahuasca vine as you want. Like, it's going to be fine. Like, you have to think about it. You have to consider basically every product you consume. I mean, we have stickers on our coffee that says this is fair trade. Sometimes there's a little story in the back, and who knows if it's true or not. But, like, they will tell you, like, oh, we have this relationship with this coffee plantation. Like, we pay our workers fairly. We try to ship this sustainably. We use recyclable packaging. Like, fair trade ayahuasca. I think that is, something that could be something to look forward to in the future, like understanding that.
Some sort of certification scheme for ayahuasca, or using cultivated alternatives. I know in Hawaii, for example, there's lots of ayahuasca growing, and a lot of this ayahuasca supplies ceremonies around the world. Or you don't even have to use the traditional plants that you mentioned, Psychotria viridis and Ministeriopsis caapi. There are plenty of ayahuasca analogs that you can substitute. And actually, several of those ayahuasca analogs are considered invasive species, depending on the country you are in. For example, one of the plants that are in the United States, the language is used noxious weed, is Syrian rue. And it grows all around Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and it's highly common, and it contains the same MOI inhibitors that you can potentially use as an ayahuasca analog. Likewise, the plant mimosa, from which bark you can contains DMT. Again, it's considered invasive species, and it grows widely distributed Mexico and south of the United States. That again can be used instead of psychotria leaves.
Yeah, that's a really good point. There are some pretty good alternatives out there. How do you feel about pharmawaska? That's I think that's a term that's used to describe like a synthetic kind of ayahuasca. And a lot of people I hear aren't really, they think it's not as good because it's synthetic chemicals you're putting together. They sort of have the same experience, but because it's not coming from nature, they feel like there's something that's missing, or maybe I don't know how you feel about pharmawaska.
I mean, trained as a Western scientist, and not necessarily believing in particular spirits, I would say, of course, it's an acceptable alternative. However, I know many people have different opinions, and they do believe that particular plants have their own quality of the experience, and it's very important for them to only use certain plants. So I think it all depends on the worldview.
That actually brings up a point that I really want to emphasize on this podcast, is that nothing about this episode is intended to be telling people what they should or should not do. I'm not really a fan of, giving people a list of rules of what they should and should not do, but I hope that people that are listening to this care about the environment, and they care about where they're sourcing their drugs from, and that they can make these considerations. At the end of the day, everybody has to make their own decision about what they're comfortable putting in their body and where it came from. I want to go back to something that you said earlier about the jaguar trade being involved with ayahuasca. I think that's something that maybe people don't think about a lot, that being a connection. What role does, jaguar play in the ayahuasca ceremony?
There are a lot of cultural associations between jaguar and ayahuasca, and it comes from the this combination of indigenous beliefs and mythology and the iconography of ayahuasca. It's very often like the first thing you Google when you Google ayahuasca, what I bet would be something to do with jaguars. And that's very, very common in cosmology of indigenous people in the Amazon who traditionally used ayahuasca. And I think it somehow moved into our own discourse and affects people and affects their behavior.
And so because the jaguar is kind of this icon of the ayahuasca experience, people are killing jaguars more and using their skins or their, I don't know what else they would use, like their bones and stuff, right? Like,
Yeah, I wasn't saying that like ayahuasca tourists are killing jaguars, but there always hasn't been an black market trade in the jaguar body parts. And that article that I am quoting right now was saying that over recent years, this black market trade shows increased demand in jaguar body parts, and they link it to association with ayahuasca tourism.
Interesting. I'll provide a link to that in the show notes.
It's one of those things about unintended consequences and certain things that are not obvious connections to make.
Yeah. I mean, even the traveling to Peru or something like that is, that's got a big carbon footprint. I think people need to decide, like, do I really need to go to South America to have this experience, or could I have it locally? And then there's a controversy of that. Like, you're bringing some of this culture to another place. Like, I think there was a New Yorker article several years ago that was really critical of an ayahuasca circle in New York City, for example. And I kind of understand both sides of that. Like, bringing this to New York.
Mm-hmm. There is also, I think, going to ayahuasca and do it in the jungle speaks to a lot of need of modern Western people to connect to something ancient, to primeval, to have some sort of ritual that we somehow lose touch in our lives. So I think I can very much see the appeal of going somewhere in the jungle and trying to have as authentic experience as possible. But unfortunately, now the more people are doing it, in a sense, the less authentic it becomes and the more commercial it becomes. And there are more and more practitioners, and we hear about all sorts of stories of unscrupulous ayahuasqueros that violate certain ethical practices and codes, about the devastating effect it has on even the local communities and the places. But on the other hand, the effect might not be devastating. It gives people jobs and provides a constant supply of tourists. It's a complex issue, ayahuasca tourism.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. It's very nuanced. There's lots of different moving parts. And like, it's hard to say, especially for me, I have no authority on this, to say what's good or bad. It's just educating people on the different aspects of this. Let's talk about iboga. This is a shrub that grows in Africa and contains the drug ibogaine. This is supposedly really good for treating addiction. Just one experience is enough to undo addiction, but the drug is also cardiotoxic, which means it can damage the heart, which is why companies like MindMed, this is a psychedelic startup company, are exploring using 18-MC. This is an analog that allegedly works like ibogaine, without the hallucinations or the heart issues. But a lot of people, I mean, until that comes out, like, are turning to the plant. There was this article in Time magazine about a veteran with PTSD that was feeling really desperate, went down to Mexico, took some ibogaine, had a very harrowing experience. It's not a very comfortable trip. I've never taken iboga before, but everything I've heard about it says it's pretty unpleasant. But anyway, this plant is key to Bwiti spiritual practices in West Central Africa, and because it's becoming more popular, there are reports that there's less and less of the plant. Tabernathe iboga is the main one, but it seems like there's another one that you can use to extract ibogaine called Voyakenga africana, which is a tree. What do you think about iboga? Is it as threatened as people say? Is the alternative just as good?
In terms of iboga in Gabon, it is threatened. And actually, there have been, in the recent years, there have been several legislations in Gabon indicating that forbidding exports. And there were several reports, one of them commissioned by the Gabonese government, that identified several threats to iboga growing there. I think it is very true that there are problems and shortages with Tabernanthe iboga in Gabon. That said, it also grows in Congo and Cameroon and certain other West African countries around it, and we have no information whatsoever about the status of iboga there. But then again, there is a lot of problems going on in Congo and Cameroon, so probably it's not very conducive to conservation studies and research. And there is a very good report from ICEERS about where they interviewed local practitioners and growers in Gabon, and they all indicate that there are shortages and there is less and less of it available due to increased in demand. And there is even some varying trends about iboga. Actually, that's also came from one of the Gabonese government reports that the threats to iboga are not just increase of demand. Again, as elsewhere in the world, a lot of problems come from deforestation and from people moving to urban environments, and a lot of land disappearing and being used for something else. And there is also a very interesting connection with ivory trade. Apparently, there are some reports. So elephants eat iboga plants, and they're actually important in distributing seeds of iboga. And there have been reports of elephant poachers, people who poach ivory, also engaging in poaching iboga.
Wow, I did not know that. So if elephants eat iboga, do they get a psychoactive effect from it?
No, they eat fruits, and the psychoactive component is in the root bark.
Right.
So I don't think they get high, they just get a nice fruit.
I don't know why, but it was kind of funny to think about. I mean, lots of animals, even going back to jaguars, I believe, use psychoactive plants. Humans aren't the only animals that seek it out. Well, what about this alternative? Do you think Voacanga africana, this tree, is a better source of iboga that maybe people could look to instead of the typical iboga plant that people go for?
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing with Voacanga africana, and it's just to say, it's not just Voacanga africana that has voacangin, which is one of the, not quite a precursor, but you can synthesize ibogaine from voacangin through certain very easy chemical steps. But there are several species of the genus Voacanga that have voacangin that can be used. Voacanga africana is just very best known, and it grows in Africa, and it grows at a much wider number of habitats than iboga. And another thing with voacanga is that you can actually extract voacangin from the fruits, so you don't have to debark the roots of the tree, which can be a lot more dangerous for the tree, if not lethal. So in this way, that's why voacanga is more sustainable, because you use fruits, it grows a lot, it's a lot more widely distributed. But also, voacanga africana is used by a lot of pharmaceutical companies to produce several drugs. I don't remember them on top of my head, but yeah, several pharmaceutical companies extract alkaloids from Voacanga africana, and there is a big trade going on in Voacanga fruits. There are like hundreds of thousands of tons of the fruits exported. So I would imagine there already exist plantations of Voacanga to supply this market, pharmaceutical market.
Interesting.
And it might be even possible to tap into pharmaceutical market, because if they extract some alkaloids from Voacanga but not voacangin, a different one, then maybe it can be a byproduct that can be used to produce ibogaine from it.
Yeah, hopefully. Well, let's talk about peyote and mescaline cacti, since we're talking about plants still. I don't think San Pedro or sort of related species are going to go extinct anytime soon. It grows relatively quickly and it's everywhere. Peyote, on the other hand, is a small cactus that grows very slowly. It holds extreme significance to many indigenous people and is increasingly threatened by development and poaching in Texas and Mexico, the only place on Earth where peyote grows wild. You have a recent preprint paper on peyote conservation titled Ecology and Conservation of Peyote in Texas, Comparative Survey of Lophophora williamsi, populations in Tamalupin thorn scrub and Chihuahuan desert. Can you summarize a little bit about what you found and what you think should be done?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, actually, this question is the one I probably can answer you most extensively because that was the project of my study, and that's what I researched a lot more thoroughly than others. I actually done my master's about peyote, and I continue working with the Cactus Conservation Institute on peyote conservation. What I wanted to say about peyote is it's of all the psychedelics mentioned in Tim Ferriss' blog or generally affected by consumption, peyote is the most endangered. And this is the biggest cause for concern, I would say, because particularly in the United States, where it only grows in small areas of Texas, in South and West Texas. And these areas where it can grow are actually rapidly disappearing because of land use change, because it's more profitable for local landowners, for ranchers to either grow something on their land or to what is called root plow the land, which is remove the native thorny vegetation and put some grasses in it. And if you have the grasses, for example, buffalo grass, as you can support a lot more cattle than with the native cacti and shrubs. So a lot of ranchers prefer to do that rather than protect the Malipan thorn scrub, which is the scientific name of this thorny brush that grows in South Texas. And another issue for peyote, again, I'm mostly talking about the United States because that's where I've done my research, is there's a huge demand from the members of the Native American Church who use peyote as a medicine and sacrament in their religious ceremonies. And if you look at the data from Texas Department of Public Safety, it shows that about 1 million plants are legally harvested annually to go into the ceremonies. And by all means, there are indications that this is not enough to satisfy demand. And the buttons are becoming smaller and smaller because all the larger plants are harvested and it just doesn't have enough time to regenerate.
Yeah, this is an ongoing debate in the whole, cactus scene, is whether there should be concentrated conservation efforts to grow as much peyote as possible. But, I guess what do you think could be done about this? And I guess really I just want to emphasize, like you said, that it seems like the biggest threat to peyote is not people that are harvesting it, but it's really the development. It's the people that own this private land and are just tearing it up with this root plowing. There's the renewable energy even are moving in, and like that's damaging. And I think that's something we should underline is a little bit. It's like if we want to help these plants, perhaps we should focus less on the people that are consuming them and more on the big businesses, the landowners that don't seem to have any respect for the plants.
Mm-hmm. And they actually don't have any incentives to look after the plants or conserve them in any way. And a lot of landowners, of course, not everyone, there are lots of landowners that want to look after their land and want to preserve it in its natural state. But some landowners want to make money, want to survive, want to have their cattle there, want to sell leases for oil and gas for wind turbines. So it really depends. And because peyote is not in any of the, doesn't have any environmental protection, there are actually rumors and concerns about poachers, that landowners don't want any poachers coming to the land, to trespassing on the land to harvest. There actually is incentive to not even have peyote, and certainly not advertise that they have peyote on their land.
Yeah, I mean, it's completely legal for them to just destroy these plants, even though unless you're a member of the Native American Church or a federally recognized tribe, possessing the plant could give you, federal prison time, I believe. It's very illegal unless you have this exemption that was hard fought. It took a long time to get it, and I think that indigenous people really are afraid of losing that privilege again, and yet this sacrament that they have is just wantonly destroyed by whoever wants to, because they don't want to attract the wrong attention, what they seem as or perceive as the wrong intention. Let's talk a little bit about your research and like, you went out to Texas, you surveyed a couple of sites. If I remember correctly, some people didn't want you to come buy their land. There was some resistance.
Yeah, absolutely. And I surveyed sites both in South Texas and West Texas, particularly in South Texas, where there is commercial harvesting of peyote and where it's more well known about peyote's existence. There are lots of landowners that I talked to that were very happy to talk to me, or even give me a tour of their land informally, but they were adamant that I not include their place as my study site, because they're thinking that, again, it would attract attention to people and they would somehow find out that peyote grows on their land. That's one thing. And second thing, a lot of landowners are actually really concerned about peyote being listed as endangered. And there was a big resistance against conservationists and federal governments interfering with their autonomy of what's going on in their land. And they somehow thought that if I, as a biologist, survey their sites and figure out how little of peyote is left, that would somehow contribute to its listing in the Endangered Species Act.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that people are so resistant to protecting plants. Like, I live near Joshua Tree, California, and there's been this debate with the state. They're trying to get Joshua trees listed as endangered, and so many developers are upset about this because they want to be able to cut down these plants whenever they want. And you look at the landscape, and there's millions of them out there. And they're like, well, what's your problem? Like, why would you say that this is a threatened plant? Like, there's so many of them, but you cut down one or two or three here or there, and like it adds up, and they grow so slowly, and they're threatened by climate change. The moths that pollinate the Joshua trees are threatened, and if they can't pollinate the Joshua trees, like, they can't keep continuing. And most of the specimens out here are really old, actually. Just to give an example, basically kind of off topic, about how, in the Southwest, there's a lot of resistance to listing plants as endangered because people are afraid of losing their rights to their property. So do you feel like Tim Ferriss's suggestion that you should take maybe San Pedro, a different cactus that contains mescaline, instead of peyote? I kind of feel that way. Like, unless it really is your spiritual background, you should avoid peyote. But that's just my opinion.
No, I absolutely agree. Like, if you really don't mind what cactus to try, or you just want to try some mescaline, sure, there is synthetic mescaline, and there is San Pedro cactus, and related to Echinopsis or Trichocereus species of cacti. However, I also want to stress that, again, in other places all over the world, peyote is not listed as Schedule 1, unlike in the United States. Mescaline is, of course, but not peyote. Like, for example, in Canada, you can grow your own peyote, and I personally see absolutely no problem with people growing their own peyote. It is a beautiful cactus. It's nice to have on your windowsill or greenhouse. And if you, of course, don't harvest it from the wild, but all over the world, there is a thriving horticultural trade in peyote. There are greenhouses full of it in Germany, in Czech Republic. There are lots of cactus enthusiasts in UK that grow peyote. It's very popular as an ornamental plant in Japan and Taiwan. And so I think if your actions do not endanger plants in the wild, we should not judge people for whatever they take and the way they alter their consciousness if the consequences of their actions are not damaging to nature or to others.
Yeah, that's a really good point. My response was really US centric. I was thinking just in the United States, which is, my blind spot there, but it's less consequential to grow it in other places. And yeah, it is a really beautiful cactus. It is so small. It's just like this, it's kind of fractally. The flowers are beautiful and pink. It's a beautiful plant. But yeah, I think I should definitely emphasize that what I was talking about is harvesting it in the wild, not taking it from somewhere cultivated.
Yeah, if you cultivate your own or grow your own from seeds, I don't know, and you live in the country where it's legal, then why not? And Canada is actually an interesting example. In Canada, San Pedro is illegal, but peyote is not, which is completely opposite of what's in the United States.
That's interesting. Canada has some really weird drug laws, like cannabis is legal, obviously, but salvia, I don't believe is.
Salvia is actually a good example of how cultivation is actually helps because, salvia in the wild, it grows in a very, very small place in Mexico in the Mazatec Mountains. And it's highly localized and actually a very rare plant in the wild. But because of extensive cultivation, it grows pretty much everywhere in the world. That's why we don't see the reports about, for example, lots of tourists go into Mazatec Mountains to harvest salvia because it's freely available in cultivation.
That's I didn't even think of that. Salvia was not on my list of plants to talk about today, but that's true for a lot of actual salvia genus. Like there's Salvia apiana, which is people call it white sage, I believe, and that's people like to burn that a lot. It smells good when you burn it, but it seems to be over harvested in the wild. But like if people grow it themselves, then it's less of a problem.
I am actually right now drinking salvia tea, Salvia officinalis.
I love salvia plants, like all of the different ones. Like they have so many different interesting properties. Let's move on to animals. There's only a few animals on Earth that produce psychedelic compounds. The best known is probably the Sonoran desert toad, also known as the Colorado River toad. It produces a venom that contains a bunch of things. But as far as I know, the only thing that seems to be psychoactive is 5-MeO-DMT. People confuse this drug with DMT a lot, but just because they have a similar name doesn't actually mean that they are the same drug or even that related. They're very different psychedelics as far as I can tell. DMT, we had this episode on DMT. If you want to listen to it, go back to Can DMT Help You Talk to Aliens? Which is kind of a sarcastic title. But DMT can launch folks into hyperspace, where they enter like an Alex Gray painting of swirling chemicals, and sometimes people encounter these beings, which some people call them angels or aliens or demons, or there's all kinds of different like descriptors for these beings that you meet on DMT. On the other hand, 5-MeO-DMT is more like just a bright white light, pure bliss. You're in nirvana almost, or something similar to that. I'm not like up to date on all my Buddhist terms. It's not very visual, though. It's the point. It's not like an encounter. There's not like a lot of conversation with other entities. I hope I'm getting all this right. But anyway, you can get 5-MeO-DMT from many plants, but you can also get it from the venom of this toad. And there's this growing concern over people going down to Tucson, Arizona, catching the toads, milking the venom, and potentially hurting the animal. What are your thoughts on this?
I think it's a very important point to raise, and 5-MeO-DMT is found in several plants. It's found in Sonoran desert toad, which is the only toad that is found, curiously, of all the other toads. Another thing about 5-methoxy-DMT is that it's actually endogenous to mammals. Just like DMT, it's found in small quantities in humans, in rats, for example. These are two species of mammals that it's been studied in. Nobody knows what it does. It's found in tiniest quantities, and even that is not very consistent, but there are multiple reports that confirm that it is endogenous. So nobody knows what it does, whether for humans or for toads, other than being part of the toad secretions, which protect it from predators.
Yeah, the toad produces this venom to protect itself, and then people, if they catch it, one of the best practices is not to express every single gland on the toad, because if you do that, it leaves it defenseless. You can also spread fungal diseases to amphibians if you're handling too many of them or putting too many in the same container. It's recommended that you wear gloves while you do this. I mean, I feel like you just shouldn't do it at all, personally. There's other sources of 5-MeO-DMT. You can get it synthetic. Why involve catching this animal and squirting this juice out of it in order to smoke it to have a psychedelic experience? Like, that seems unnecessary. And unlike a lot of the other plants that we've talked about here, there's really no indigenous history of using 5-MeO-DMT, at least not strong evidence of that. I mean, there's like toad drawings, but that could be any frog. Specifically, the smoking aspect of it is a relatively new phenomenon that started around the 60s, and it's not like this ancient practice, whereas peyote, there's evidence of using that for 5,000 years or more.
Yeah, indeed. And actually, the use of toads and toad secretions, and actually it's not toad venom, it's toad secretions, because venom is something that's actively injected, so you can be stung and it will be venomous, or you can be bitten and it's venomous, but this is just poison or a toxin. Toad secretions, there is no archaeological evidence or no conclusive evidence at all that it has been used for psychoactive purposes by indigenous people. There are some indigenous people now that adopted this practice and incorporated it into their rituals, but again, it's a very recent phenomenon. And recreational use of toads can be traced back to 1980s, to the publication of the booklets about Buffalo virus by Albert Most, and there was very interesting episode in Hamilton's Pharmacopoeia recently about it, where he was trying to track down the real author of this booklet and the founder of the Church of the Toad of Light or something like that. And I fully agree with you, Troy, that probably better not to harass toads and bother them, because they're already under a lot of pressure. Toads and amphibians in general. They're probably the group of animals under most stresses from all the things that are going on with human activity. They're highly sensitive to all the pesticides that can be found in water as a runoff from agricultural fields. They're highly sensitive to the effects of climate change, and particularly Sonoran desert toad that lives in the desert. So any disruptions to the annual cycles of the rains, for example, or there being droughts can have catastrophic effect for the survival of toad. There is massive problems with the roads and other infrastructure. A lot of toads are killed while trying to cross the road, but also they hang out next to the roads because roads have lights, and lights attract insects, and toads hunt those insects. Again, there is also major insect decline in numbers of insect population, which again would adversely affect toads. There are so many factors that put toads under stress that adding additional thing could be the last straw that really indicates that could be really damaging for the populations of toads. So I would highly recommend for anyone to use synthetic 5-methoxy-DMT. And moreover, synthetic is probably much safer as well, because you can weight exactly what dose you're taking, because the content of 5-methoxy-DMT in the toad secretions can vary greatly. It can there are estimates that it goes from about 5 to 30% of dry weight, but I don't know what factors affect it. It could be something in toad's diet. There are theories, for example, that venom secretion composition depends on how many darkling beetles those toads eat, and other factors, maybe time of the year, nutritional state, age. All those factors can influence the venom composition. So you pretty much ingest this unknown cocktail of ingredients without knowing exactly how much 5-methoxy-DMT is there. Like, it makes sense. And moreover, studies, epidemiological studies with people who've taken both pure 5-MeO-DMT and toad venom indicate that both experience improvements in well-being and mood and positive effects from it.
Yeah. Since you brought up Hamilton's Pharmacopoeia, he uses the term venom a lot. I think that's why I do it. He has some explanation for it that I can't remember, but yeah, I think you're right. It is probably better to call it a secretion. I just call it a venom because
it's some... very, very common in use.
Semantics, but
like a biologist in me, no, it's not venom.
Yeah, I know, right? And the synthetic version is pretty easy to synthesize if you're a skilled chemist. I couldn't do it, but yeah, it seems like a better option than catching this animal and squeezing it. And it's interesting that you brought up the diet, because I think that's exactly why poison arrow frogs have the poisonous secretions on them, is because they eat an insect, and I can't remember what it is, maybe a blister beetle. So if you remove the frog from that diet, like, it's no longer gonna hurt you if you touch it. So maybe that's sort of similar to what the Sonoran desert toad has. And I think that, yeah, you want to know what you're ingesting and not just this white creamy substance that could be anything, any concentration. You want to have, because I think 5-MeO-DMT can be kind of dangerous sometimes. I mean,
in terms of intensity, it's only comparable to salvia, and I bring up salvia again. Like, it's equally, like, very, very short but very intense experience. It's very, of course, it's very different in terms of subjective experience from salvia effects, but in terms of level of intensity and duration, it's similar.
Yeah, there's this major news story about this Spanish porn star. They gave 5-MeO-DMT to somebody and they died. And who knows, like, unless you have a really detailed toxicology report, like how much the 5-MeO-DMT contributed to that overdose, which of course is tragic. But I know that smoking it can involve a lot of thrashing, vomiting. It can be very uncomfortable, and worth it in the end. Hopefully, people have an experience that can be long lasting and beneficial. But there are considerations to be made there. And I think that's just more reason to, not harass the toads.
Mm-hmm. And also with the 5-MeO-DMT, you have to be very careful with the monoamine oxidase inhibitors. So, for example, never ever mix 5-MeO-DMT in things like changa, for example, which some people do with the DMT. It's very dangerous, and there are several documented fatalities, like in scientific literature, documented with 5-methoxy-DMT in combination with MAO inhibitors. That's one of the important things to be aware of. And again, with everything, as we were talking about ayahuasca, it's also a question of the context that you're taking and practitioners you do it with. There have been scandals involving several practitioners with 5-MeO-DMT that use, I would even describe it as abusive methods. Like, there's, you can look videos on YouTube about people having poured water in their mouth while they are at the peak of their 5-MeO-DMT experience, or people been getting electric shocks as well, which is I consider highly unethical. So it's very important to research who you do it if you decide to do it in a say in a medicine circles or in a ceremonial way.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of bad practices with 5-MeO-DMT. Quote shamans, people that administer it, and it's not. We could talk about that all day. It's really disturbing. But
there was even one practitioner that claimed to collect money for toad sanctuary and was giving lectures and advertising how he is into conservation of toads and he's going to buy this land and establish a toad breeding program, and then he just pocketed the money, and that's the last I heard about the toad sanctuary.
That's really unfortunate because their range is definitely disappearing. They used to appear in California. They don't anymore because of agriculture. They put these canals in, and it just destroys their environment. The toads don't exist in California anymore. They're still in northern Mexico, southern Arizona, southern New Mexico a little bit. But I think that's something to emphasize, is that development really is the bigger problem here. There was a news story a couple of years ago where some people, were going down, catching toads, putting them in a plastic bag, and they got arrested, they got caught. But I mean, that's a really rare one-off occurrence. Like, I don't think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, that there's a lot of people that are really going out and poaching the toads. If the toads are really threatened by development, agriculture, pesticides, and like you said, these lights that are built by roadways that attract the insects, to attract the toads, and then they become roadkill. That is a far bigger problem. And the thing is not to dismiss the poaching problem. I'm not going to say that's not non-existent, but if people actually care about protecting the toad, I think instead of criticizing, psychonauts or hikers or whatever, work on efforts to get Tucson to implement, pesticide bans, or turning Tucson's a dark sky city, so maybe less streetlights is a good idea. That kind of thing. Those kinds of things can maybe have a bigger impact.
And generally protecting Sonoran Desert habitat.
Yeah.
And making sure that there is space for toads to live. It's not encroached by development. And I think also the problem for the toads is not so much individual psychonauts that catch and release maybe one or two toads. It's more the economies of scale. So what if, say, hundreds or rather than hundreds of people trying the toad, it goes up to thousands and higher and higher, and hundreds, thousands, etc. And there are already reports I've seen on social media in Mexico about toads harvested commercially for all those retreat centers that operate in Mexico and treatment centers where toads is offered amongst any number of other things that's to treat anything, you name it, from DSM-5.
Yeah. I think that that's something I really want to underline here, is not to tell people what to do, but the whole point of this podcast episode is to just talk about what people can actually focus on, the bigger problems. And I think that, our out of control capitalist society is really a big aspect of all of this. And I think that, if you're really going to go out of your way to travel to go take ayahuasca or go poach a toad, or, go to Texas and take peyote out of the wild, you understand the value of these medicines, but then you probably also have good intentions to maybe you could reconsider this kind of thing and think about how your actions have bigger consequences. And that's, we've talked about this before, personal responsibility and education are really key to addressing this issue.
Mm-hmm. And approaching this also issues from the point of view of reciprocity. So if you have learned something important from the experience from the plant medicines, from animal medicines. Use it for the good. Try to eat less meat, support conservation organizations, protect habitat. Yeah, just use less.
Yeah. Well, speaking of that, are there any organizations that you think are doing a good job on conservation for psychedelic plants or animals?
Yes, there are lots of organizations that are springing up all over, depending on what plant you have in mind. Like, for example, for Iboga, there are organizations like Blessings of the Forest or Ibango that are trying to plant more Iboga in Gabon and work with the local people. ICERS is doing a lot of work with ayahuasca and Iboga as well, and communities. When it comes to peyote, there is, of course, Cactus Conservation Institute, which I am a board member of, but also Indigenous Peyote Conservation Initiative, which is even more important for survival of peyote because it's led by Native Americans, and they are doing amazing work trying to protect peyote, and they're setting up conservation projects, cultivation projects. They're working with all the local ranchers to try to protect peyote on their land. So yeah, do your research and support many organizations. And I would also say support organizations that only work specifically for psychedelic plants, but protect habitat in general, because this is very important. You can't look at one thing without looking at the whole, and protection of the habitat itself is, on the grand scheme of things, is even more important.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think there's some sort of umbrella effect, like if you kind of focus on the whole picture instead of just the things that are kind of cool. I mean, I think it's really amazing that these plants and animals and fungi have evolved these chemical defenses that, also can have benefits to humans, but we also have to consider, the consequences of that. Focusing on protecting the whole thing, I think, is important. Okay. Where can people find you if they want to learn more about you?
That's a good question. I try to stay out of social media nowadays, but you can link to my ResearchGate or LinkedIn.
Well, I really appreciate your time today. This is a great topic, and so many people are starting to care more about this, which I think is important.
It's really important nowadays, particularly because there is a growing awareness about the therapeutic potential of psychedelics. There is a lot of good that they can do, but it's just very important to approach it responsibly and with respect and reciprocity.
Yeah, I agree. Well, thank you so much for your time today. Talk to you soon.
Yeah, thank you, Troy. It was fun.
Hey, thanks for listening to Narcotica. You made it all the way to the credits, the best part. This is where we tell you how you can learn more information and help support this program. Narcotica is an independent production by Christopher Morat, Zachary Siegel, and myself, Troy Farah. Co-producers this episode are Aaron Ferguson and me again. I did quite a bit of post-production. If you like the show, you can support us by joining our Patreon. Just go to patreon.com/narcotica. You can get some merch like stickers if you request them and other perks that are coming soon. A little goes a long way, so thanks for helping us out. We are ad-free and we want to keep it that way. Patreon isn't for you, that's fine. You can help us by spreading the word. Tell all your friends and family about this podcast advocating for social justice and abolishing the drug war. And then rate us wherever you get your podcasts so others can find us. Our theme music is by Glassboy, and Jenny Shea is the voice of Narcotica. Additional music this episode is by Ketsa. You can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, I guess we have an Instagram account now, SoundCloud, YouTube, Spotify, and iTunes. That's everything. Have a blessed week.